I see it! Cover me!
We move out at 0600. Follow the ridge line here.
Keep an eye on the flank, soldier. We hit the beach at 0600 hours. Move fast, stick to the jungle line here. Keep moving, watch the wire! We have to push inland!
January 17th, 1945. The dawn sky over Luzon, Philippines, is a muted gray, heavy with smoke and the scent of salt from nearby seas. From the American lines, soldiers peer through the morning haze, eyes scanning for the unmistakable shapes of Japanese pillboxes embedded in the hills. The first explosions ripple across the valley, followed by clouds of dense, white smoke curling upward, swallowing the landscape in a ghostly fog. Through the murk, figures move, Japanese defenders crouched behind shattered stone and sandbags, their rifles trembling in anticipation. They cannot see the approaching Americans, who advance under the unnatural cover, muffled steps on wet earth. Smoke grenades hiss and pop, thickening the shroud, hiding men, tanks, and artillery alike. A sudden volley erupts. Rounds strike empty air where Japanese soldiers expected solid targets. Confusion spreads like wildfire. For the Americans, the smoke is more than cover. It is a tool, a carefully orchestrated weapon. Every movement is choreographed, every step calculated. For the Japanese, it is a nightmare. They had never faced an enemy who could erase sight itself, bend the battlefield into invisibility. Moments that could have been death traps become opportunities. In the distance, a lieutenant signals forward and the shadowy figures surge. In that fog, fear and surprise intertwine. What had been a straightforward defense becomes chaos. And here, in the thick veil of smoke, the course of this battle, and the minds of those fighting it, will be changed forever. By 1944, the Pacific War had reached a pivotal stage. The United States, after years of grueling campaigns across the Pacific, had begun its island-hopping strategy in earnest, moving closer to Japan with each amphibious assault. Battles like Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu had taught American commanders harsh lessons. Japanese forces were rarely defeated by sheer firepower alone. They fortified every beach, every ridge, every village with intricate defensive networks, pillboxes, tunnels, barbed wire, and cleverly concealed artillery positions. The Japanese had perfected the art of prepared defense, often using the terrain itself to their advantage. Their soldiers were disciplined, fanatically loyal, and willing to fight to the last man. For the Americans, overcoming these positions required not just courage, but innovation. It was in this environment that new tactics emerged, designed to counter the Japanese mastery of defensive warfare. Among them, the use of smoke as both cover and deception would come to the forefront. Smoke had long been a component of battlefield tactics, used in the First World War to obscure troop movements. But in the Pacific, the dense jungles, steep cliffs, and coral reefs presented new opportunities and challenges. Smoke could mask an entire battalion crossing open terrain, conceal the advance of tanks onto a beach, or hide artillery placements from enemy observation. More than a mere screen, it could become a psychological weapon, inducing panic and hesitation in an enemy unaccustomed to fighting in visual obscurity. The United States Army and Marine Corps had begun experimenting with specialized smoke equipment by 1943. Smoke grenades, artillery-launched smoke shells, and improvised smoke generators were integrated into assault plans. At the same time, intelligence officers studied Japanese defensive habits, identifying patterns and predicting how defenders would respond under restricted visibility. Commanders realized that smoke could exploit a fundamental weakness: the Japanese reliance on visual targeting. While their rifles, machine guns, and artillery were deadly accurate in clear conditions, the sudden loss of sight could create hesitation. And hesitation on a battlefield could be deadly. In early 1944, the lessons from the Marshall Islands and the Marianas were clear. At Saipan, for instance, American forces struggled against entrenched Japanese positions in the rugged hills. Direct frontal assaults were costly. Units suffered heavy casualties under machine gun fire. Smoke screens were used sparingly at first, sometimes covering only the final few meters of a frontal advance. But even this limited application proved transformative. Troops advancing under smoke moved with less exposure and were able to neutralize defensive positions more efficiently. Officers noted in after-action reports that Japanese defenders often froze, unable to locate advancing Americans until the smoke began to lift. That moment of paralysis could turn the tide of skirmish. By late 1944, this tactic evolved further. In the Philippines, during the approach to Leyte and Luzon, American planners integrated smoke into coordinated assaults. Engineers laid smoke pots along beaches, while artillery units launched smoke rounds ahead of the main advance. Tanks moved behind thick veils, infantry followed, and naval bombardments were timed to coincide with the densest smoke coverage. In practice, this turned previously predictable Japanese lines into a disorienting maze. The enemy could no longer rely solely on sight. They had to depend on sound, instinct, and limited intelligence. In the humid, tangled jungles of Luzon, with limited visibility and dense terrain, this proved especially devastating. The Japanese, for their part, had little precedent for such widespread use of smoke by their opponents. While they occasionally employed smoke for signaling or minor concealment, it was rarely tactical at the scale the Americans now employed. Japanese doctrine emphasized fortified observation posts and interlocking fields of fire. When visibility was suddenly denied, their entire defensive system, designed to dominate open approaches and kill with precision, faltered. Reports from forward positions described moments of confusion, soldiers firing into vague shapes, or halting entirely when the advancing Americans vanished behind clouds of white smoke. The psychological effect, combined with relentless artillery and coordinated infantry advances, created a battlefield environment few had ever encountered. By January 1945, these techniques had become a standard part of the American approach to the Philippine campaign. Units trained rigorously in smoke deployment, learning how to time movement with the dissipation and density of the cloud, how to coordinate artillery and infantry, and how to maintain communication despite reduced visibility. The combination of preparation, discipline, and technology allowed American forces to turn what had once been a defensive disadvantage into an offensive tool. In essence, smoke became more than concealment. It became a force multiplier, amplifying the effect of every soldier, every tank, every gun on the battlefield. And so, as dawn broke over Luzon on that January morning, the stage was set. The Japanese defenders would face not just a physical assault, but an assault on their senses, a war of perception as much as a firepower. In the thickening haze, the battlefield itself became an instrument of surprise, confusion, and ultimately, American advantage, ushering in a new chapter in the Pacific War. The island of Luzon, the largest in the Philippine archipelago, presented a formidable challenge to any invading force. Its terrain was a patchwork of steep ridges, dense jungle, and winding rivers, punctuated by small towns and strategic highways. By early 1945, the Japanese Imperial Army had entrenched itself across the island, preparing for what they expected to be a decisive defense against the advancing Americans. Units such as the 14th Area Army, under General Tomoyuki Yamashita, had fortified the mountains, valleys, and river crossings with interconnected bunkers, minefields, and hidden artillery positions. Every ridge was a potential death trap, every clearing a kill zone. Their strategy was clear: bleed the invaders slowly, force costly frontal assaults, and delay American progress long enough for Japan to regroup. For the Americans, the challenge was monumental. The Sixth Army, commanded by General Walter Kruger, had been tasked with securing Luzon as part of MacArthur's broader plan to liberate the Philippines. Intelligence suggested that Japanese forces would fight tenaciously. An initial reconnaissance revealed a landscape thick with hidden defenses. Direct assaults were not only deadly, but often stalled in the face of meticulously prepared positions. Commanders recognized that traditional tactics, advancing in visible formations under covering fire, would result in high casualties and stalled momentum. A new approach was needed. This is where smoke emerged not merely as a protective measure, but as a tactical innovation that could transform the battlefield. Smoke would conceal movements, mask the positioning of artillery and tanks, and, crucially, exploit the Japanese reliance on sight to coordinate defense. Early operations on Luzon, such as the landings at Lingayen Gulf in January 1945, illustrated this shift. Thousands of American troops moved behind thick plumes of smoke generated by specialized smoke pots, artillery rounds, and even improvised fuel-based smoke devices. The effect was disorienting. Japanese machine gunners and snipers, trained to pick out targets across open fields, suddenly found themselves firing into invisible space. Artillery observers could not adjust their fire effectively. Even experienced soldiers froze or hesitated, uncertain where the advancing forces were located. The first wave of smoke-covered assaults was led by Marine and Army units working in tight coordination. Infantry advanced shoulder to shoulder, relying on hand signals, prearranged timings, and trust in their armored support. Tanks moved stealthily within the smoke, rolling forward while providing suppressive fire against known enemy positions. Naval bombardments were synchronized to maintain constant pressure on Japanese defenses, masking the noise of advancing troops and adding to the overall confusion. In after-action reports, officers emphasized that the combination of obscured visibility, relentless firepower, and disciplined coordination often caused Japanese defenders to retreat prematurely or abandon fortified positions without a fight. Yet the psychological impact was just as significant as the tactical one. The Japanese soldiers were not accustomed to being blinded on the battlefield. Their doctrine emphasized careful observation, pre-planned kill zones, and decisive counterattacks. When the Americans enveloped their positions in thick smoke, the familiar rules of engagement no longer applied. Soldiers fired at fleeting shadows, sometimes striking each other in panic, while others hesitated entirely, unsure whether the enemy was advancing or retreating. The confusion could cascade through entire units, disrupting command and control and leaving key positions vulnerable. The effectiveness of smoke was further enhanced by its integration with other battlefield innovations. Flamethrower teams and demolition squads exploited gaps created by smoke coverage to infiltrate bunkers. Forward observers used radio communication to direct artillery and naval gunfire onto enemy positions without exposing themselves. In jungle-clad hills or across wide river crossings, the smoke acted as a shield, a silent partner in every maneuver. The enemy could see nothing, yet everything was under observation, every step calculated, and every advantage leveraged. It was not just the immediate battle that made smoke so transformative, it was the precedent it set for future operations. Commanders realized that controlling visibility could be as decisive as controlling firepower. Entire operational plans began to incorporate smoke as a central component, not merely a supplementary tactic. From small skirmishes to large-scale assaults, The Americans had learned how to manipulate the battlefield itself, turning the environment into a weapon that reshaped enemy perception and forced adaptation. By the time the Americans pressed deeper into Luzon, the Japanese were already reacting defensively to this new form of warfare. Reports from the front lines describe the palpable tension as soldiers grappled with the unseen. Some Japanese units attempted countersmoke measures, firing tracer rounds into suspected enemy positions or retreating to secondary lines of defense. Others remained pinned down, their discipline unable to overcome the fear of the invisible. For the Americans, every advance under smoke reinforced the lesson. Visibility could be controlled, and with it, the flow of battle itself. In sum, the stage was set not merely for a clash of armies, but for a confrontation of perception and innovation. The Japanese defenders, trained to dominate through sight and precision, were now being challenged by a force that could manipulate what they saw, or more importantly, what they could not see. In this crucible, the power of smoke would be fully realized, setting the conditions for the intense tactical encounters that would define the climax of the Luzon campaign. For the American infantrymen, advancing under a cloud of smoke was both terrifying and liberating. Imagine a Marine in the 6th Army, standing waist-deep in tidal mud at Lingayen Gulf. The smoke from fuel pots and artillery shells rises in thick plumes, curling across the sand and into the jungle beyond. Shapes of obstacles, wooden stakes, tangled barbed wire, and sunken vehicles fade into an opaque haze. The soldier cannot see more than a few meters ahead, yet he moves forward, guided by training, hand signals, and the trust in the man next to him. Every step is a risk. Every breath carries the acrid sting of burning smoke. But in this risk lies opportunity. He is invisible to the Japanese sniper perched atop a ridge, hidden from the machine gun, firing blindly into the fog. For the Japanese defenders, the human experience was starkly different. They were trained to fight by sight, to identify targets, and to coordinate overlapping fields of fire across open terrain. Now those skills faltered. A machine gunner peers through his scope, expecting a clear view of advancing troops, and sees only a shifting wall of white. Confusion sets in. Hesitation spreads across entire trenches. Soldiers fire at fleeting shadows, misjudge distances, or freeze entirely, uncertain whether an enemy is close enough to engage. Written reports from captured units describe invisible attackers and ghost battalions, emphasizing the disorienting effect on seasoned troops. In the haze, fear becomes a tangible presence, as soldiers on both sides navigate a battlefield that is transformed into something almost otherworldly, a place where sound, instinct, and luck dictate survival more than training alone. Tactically, smoke redefined engagement. American commanders realized that obscuring movement could neutralize the Japanese reliance on long-range precision. In prior island battles, frontal assaults against entrenched positions had been devastatingly costly. Smoke screens allowed infantry and armor to advance where it had once been suicidal. Tanks could push forward behind opaque clouds, suppressing known enemy positions while infantry infiltrated gaps without being seen. At Luzon's Lingayen Gulf, engineers laid smoke pots along the ridge lines and riverbanks, while artillery fired continuous smoke round to maintain coverage over critical zones. Marines moved shoulder to shoulder through the haze, flanking pillboxes and bunker complexes while Japanese defenders, unable to target them visually, fired blindly into the clouds. In one sequence reported in after-action notes, a company of American infantry advanced for nearly 500 meters under a dense smoke screen before Japanese troops could mount an effective response. The delay, the confusion, and the inability to coordinate fire all combined to turn what might have been a slaughter into a decisive advantage. Smoke also enabled deception. Commanders could simulate assaults in one sector while moving the real force elsewhere. masking the direction and strength of attacks. Enemy observers, deprived of sight, overestimated threats or misread movements, creating openings for exploitation. It was not merely cover. It was control over the enemy's perception. Smoke was not an accidental tool. It was a product of careful engineering and coordination. The Americans used a range of devices: smoke grenades, fuel-based smoke pots, and artillery shells specifically designed to produce thick, long-lasting clouds. Naval units contributed by generating smoke from offshore positions, hiding troop landings from Japanese observers. Engineers calculated density, duration, and placement to ensure that infantry and armor could advance without exposure. In some operations, entire valleys seemed to flow with smoke, rivers of opaque white that concealed men and machines alike. Forward observers could continue to direct fire using radio and prearranged coordinates, even when Japanese troops could not see them. This technological integration amplified the psychological impact. What appeared as a simple fog on the battlefield was, in reality, a carefully orchestrated web of concealment, mobility, and firepower. The Japanese, with limited access to such coordinated smoke tactics, were effectively blind, unable to respond with equivalent precision. For commanders, smoke required foresight, timing, and discipline. General Walter Kruger and his staff meticulously orchestrated smoke operations, coordinating infantry, tanks, artillery, and naval fire down to the minute. Movement had to be precise. Mistimed advances could lead to friendly fire incidents, gaps in coverage, or exposure at the wrong moment. Communication shifted from shouted orders to hand signals, flares, and prearranged timings, demanding trust in subordinate units to act independently and decisively. Leaders also had to anticipate enemy reactions. Smoke disrupted Japanese doctrine and forced commanders to predict hesitation, retreat, or misfires. The ability to manipulate visibility became a force multiplier. One screen of smoke could allow a battalion to bypass a defensive line entirely or create a decisive breach in a seemingly impregnable position. Leadership and smoke were inseparable. One without the other risked turning the battlefield into chaos, even for the Americans. One sequence captures all angles simultaneously. On January 17, 1945, at Lingayen Gulf, Marines advanced along a heavily mined beach. Smoke pots hissed along the ridgelines, artillery spat clouds that mingled with the wind, and tanks rolled forward under the haze. Infantry moved carefully through mud and debris, shielded from enemy fire. Japanese defenders, previously confident in their fields of fire, hesitated, misfired, and occasionally retreated. Observers noted that soldiers froze, trying to interpret sounds in the mist. Forward American leaders signaled the advance of engineers and flamethrower teams, clearing pillboxes while the smoke shielded their movement. The combination of human courage, technological innovation, tactical ingenuity, and disciplined leadership turned a deadly frontal assault into a calculated, effective strike. In sum, smoke was far more than a visual veil. It became a multidimensional instrument. It reshaped human experience, disrupted established tactics, leveraged technology in unprecedented ways, and demanded precise leadership. For the Japanese, the effect was catastrophic. Their doctrine and instincts faltered under a battlefield they could no longer see or fully comprehend. For the Americans, smoke became a force multiplier, a tool that converted uncertainty into decisive action. 4 Japanese soldiers entrenched on Luzon's ridges and river valleys. Smoke represented a new, disorienting form of warfare. They had spent years training to exploit every sight line, to coordinate interlocking fields of fire, and to respond instantly to the approach of American forces. Their doctrine emphasized precision. Every shot counted, every defensive position had a purpose. Now, this meticulous planning was undermined by a wall of white haze that obscured targets and erased predictable battle rhythms. Accounts from Japanese defensive units highlight the intensity of this shock. Machine gunners reported seeing figures vanish into nothing and attempted to fire on fleeting shadows, often misjudging distance and trajectory. Observers noted the eerie silence punctuated by erratic bursts of gunfire, as if the battlefield itself had betrayed them. Units froze, misinterpreted movement, and at times retreated without orders. One captured report described soldiers firing repeatedly into smoke, only to realize later that no Americans were present in the area they had targeted. The psychological strain of operating in visual uncertainty caused breakdowns in command, hesitation in execution, and ultimately, a loss of battlefield initiative. This perspective emphasizes that the shock experienced by Japanese troops was not merely physical but cognitive. Their sensory cues, their eyes, which had guided survival, were rendered unreliable. In a battle where reaction speed and accuracy were life or death, this confusion magnified casualties and facilitated American advances. The battlefield had become a psychological weapon, and smoke was its amplifier. Beyond immediate tactics, smoke had profound moral and psychological effects on both sides. For the Americans, it generated confidence and momentum. Soldiers could advance under cover, knowing that the enemy could not fully target them. Smoke provided a sense of control, even amid chaos, giving troops the courage to move where open ground had previously been lethal. For Japanese forces, the effect was often demoralizing. The sudden inability to see the enemy undermined confidence in training and doctrine. Reports detail moments where units hesitated, arguing over whether to engage or withdraw, a paralysis rare in a military renowned for discipline and tenacity. This mental disruption led to tactical mistakes. Defensive lines were abandoned prematurely, counterattacks miscoordinated, and morale eroded in a cascading effect. Soldiers described feeling hunted, not by a visible foe, but by a presence they could neither confirm nor locate, a concept foreign to the precise, controlled combat they had mastered. Smoke thus served as both shield and sword. It protected American forces while simultaneously attacking the enemy's morale and cognitive stability. Entire battles were influenced by this dual effect, illustrating that warfare extends beyond bullets and artillery. Perception, fear, and uncertainty can be as decisive as firepower. On a broader level, smoke reshaped operational planning. Commanders realized that controlling visibility could force the enemy to abandon strongholds without a direct assault. In the Luzon campaign, entire ridges and river crossings were secured with fewer casualties than expected, simply by masking troop movements and creating uncertainty among defenders. Operations that once demanded months of attrition could now be executed more efficiently, combining firepower, maneuver, and psychological manipulation. This strategic use of smoke also influenced the coordination between branches. Army units, Marines, artillery, and naval bombardments had to act in concert to maintain continuous cover and misdirection. Timing was critical. Artillery-generated smoke, naval smoke screens, and infantry movement all had to be synchronized, or the advantage was lost. The Americans' ability to integrate these elements showcased a level of operational sophistication rarely seen in prior island campaigns. Smoke, once auxiliary, became central to operational design. One notable sequence illustrates the combined impact of smoke on human, tactical, and strategic levels. During the advance on the coastal town of San Fabian, American units deployed a smoke screen along the beachhead while engineers cleared mines and obstacles. Tanks moved forward under cover, supporting infantry units that flanked Japanese positions in adjacent ridges. The defenders, previously confident in their fields of fire, opened fire blindly into the mist. Some units retreated, believing they were outflanked. Others attempted to return fire only to collide with fellow soldiers or empty air. This sequence exemplifies the multi-layered advantage smoke provided. It allowed American forces to maintain momentum, reduce casualties, and exploit the enemy's psychological confusion. Observers noted that even when smoke began to thin, Japanese units hesitated, uncertain whether the Americans had withdrawn or were advancing elsewhere. The battlefield itself had been transformed, controlled not through brute force alone, but through the deliberate manipulation of perception. The implications of smoke in the Pacific Campaign were profound. Japanese troops learned, too late, that visibility could be weaponized, and that the absence of sight could be more dangerous than a frontal assault. For American forces, smoke became a template for future operations, a lesson in leveraging technology, coordination, and psychology. Its success demonstrated that victory depended not only on superior numbers or firepower, but on mastery of perception itself. By the end of the Luzon campaign, smoke had proven its worth across multiple dimensions. It saved lives, enabled tactical innovation, shattered enemy morale, and set a precedent for operational design in jungle, urban, and coastal combat. The shock experienced by Japanese forces was not incidental. It was the inevitable outcome of a carefully conceived, meticulously executed integration of human skill, technology, and leadership under uncertainty. The morning of January 17, 1945, dawned over Lingayen Gulf like any other, but beneath the gray light lay a tension that would define the turning point of the Luzon campaign. American forces had gathered offshore in precise formations, the roar of waves masking the distant hum of engines and the low rumble of artillery preparing to lay down a preliminary barrage. Thousands of troops, Marines and Army soldiers alike, waited on landing craft, bracing against both the chill and the anticipation of what awaited on the shore. As the first smoke pots ignited along the beaches, thick, white clouds began to curl skyward, swallowing the sand, the obstacles, and the Japanese forward positions in a ghostly haze. The Americans had learned from previous island campaigns. The enemy's reliance on visual targeting would be their undoing. Every step forward, every maneuver, was choreographed to exploit this advantage. Tanks rolled forward under cover, their tracks churning mud and water into the mist, while infantrymen advanced in tight formations, communicating silently through hand signals. The battlefield had become a living experiment in controlled perception, an environment where visibility dictated life and death. Japanese defenders, entrenched in pillboxes and interlocking fields of fire along the ridges overlooking the beaches, had been anticipating a frontal assault. They were prepared for artillery barges, prepared for the landing craft to approach, prepared for the Americans to rush forward under the open sky. Yet the sudden appearance of dense smoke shattered those expectations. Machine guns that had once dominated the beach now fired blindly into vapor. Snipers, expecting to pick off advancing soldiers, hesitated as figures flickered in and out of sight. Observers reported that Japanese troops hesitated for precious seconds, those moments enough for entire squads to close the distance unscathed. The first wave of American soldiers hit the beach with precision. Under the concealment of smoke, they bypassed the most heavily fortified obstacles. Engineers followed closely behind, clearing mines and setting demolition charges on hidden bunkers. Flamethrower teams moved silently within the haze, exploiting the confusion to neutralize defensive positions that had once seemed impregnable. Every movement was a calculated strike, a choreography that Japanese soldiers could neither predict nor counter. By mid-morning, the first defensive line along the beach was effectively neutralized, with minimal American casualties compared to previous assaults in the Pacific. From the air, Observers noted the scale of the operation. Smoke screens stretched along the entire landing zone, extending from the sand dunes to the river estuaries inland. Naval gunfire was synchronized with the obscuring clouds, striking known enemy positions while masking the sound of advancing infantry. Artillery forward observers, communicating via radio, adjusted fire with near-invisible precision. Tanks moved in tandem with infantry units, their armor shielding men while the smoke concealed their approach. It was an orchestration of technology, human skill, and environmental manipulation. The Japanese response was chaotic but instinctive. Some units attempted to fire through the smoke, only to hit their own positions or waste ammunition on phantom targets. Others attempted counterattacks in areas they believed the Americans were weakest, only to encounter squads already entrenched and advancing under cover. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion. Orders were misheard, misinterpreted, or delayed entirely due to the visual disruption. Reports described soldiers shouting through the haze, pointing at shadows, uncertain if they were friend or foe. Entire defensive sectors collapsed, not under the weight of superior firepower, but under the uncertainty imposed by the smoke. By noon, the Americans had secured the beachhead and advanced several kilometers inland. Key strategic points along the Lingayen River and adjacent ridges were captured with efficiency that would have been impossible without the use of smoke. This was no longer a simple tactical maneuver. It was a decisive turning point. The ability to mask movement, disorient the enemy, and maintain operational momentum demonstrated that innovation and perception could outweigh even the most well-prepared defenses. Individual acts of bravery highlighted the human element within this tactical landscape. Soldiers and Marines moved forward despite choking smoke, heavy fire, and treacherous terrain. Officers led from the front, signaling charges and guiding units through near-zero visibility. Engineers dismantled obstacles while artillery shells landed nearby, and flamethrower teams cleared bunkers where machine guns had once dominated. Each coordinated act contributed to a broader operational success. It was an intricate dance conducted under fire and executed with remarkable discipline. Yet the climax of the morning was not just the physical conquest of the beach. It was the psychological collapse of the Japanese defenses. Units that had expected to repel the landing found themselves disoriented, hesitant, and fragmented. Retreats became chaotic. Attempts at counterattacks faltered under the sustained pressure and invisibility imposed by the smoke. For the first time in the Luzon campaign, American forces could advance with both momentum and surprise, exploiting confusion rather than brute force alone. By late afternoon, the American beachhead was firmly established. Observers noted that Japanese casualties were disproportionately high in areas where smoke-induced confusion had prevented coordinated defense. American losses, by contrast, were remarkably low for the scale of the assault, a testament to the tactical brilliance of using visibility itself as a weapon. The battlefield had been reshaped. Positions once considered impregnable were now vulnerable, and the enemy's reaction, paralyzed by uncertainty, had shifted the balance decisively. The climax of this engagement demonstrated a profound principle. In warfare, control of perception can be as decisive as control of firepower. The combination of human courage, technological innovation, and tactical foresight created a moment where the fog of battle became an instrument of victory. The stage was now set for the next phase of the Luzon campaign, where the Americans would press their advantage further into the island's interior, leveraging the lessons learned from smoke-based operations to shatter enemy defenses repeatedly. As American forces pushed inland, smoke screens were deployed with unprecedented precision. Engineers laid smoke pots along ridge lines while artillery units fired shells designed to produce long-lasting clouds. Tanks, moving in tight formations behind the obscuring haze, provided mobile cover for advancing infantry. The sequence of movements was meticulously timed. Artillery would lay down smoke, infantry would advance under it, flamethrower teams and engineers would follow, clearing bunkers and obstacles, and then tanks would roll forward to consolidate positions. Japanese defenders, now forced to adapt on the fly, found themselves repeatedly outmaneuvered. The smoke masked not only the direction and timing of attacks, but also the composition of units advancing. Machine gun positions were bypassed, pillboxes were flanked, and artillery emplacements came under surprise assault. 4 Japanese commanders attempting to coordinate counterattacks. The battlefield had become almost unrecognizable. Reports described soldiers firing blindly into clouds, misidentifying the location of American troops, and even retreating from positions that were no longer under immediate threat. By the evening of the first day, American forces had advanced several kilometers inland, capturing strategic river crossings and high ground. The combination of smoke, timing, and coordination rendered Japanese defenses ineffective, achieving objectives that would have been costly in previous island campaigns. The psychological effect on Japanese troops was profound. Smoke induced uncertainty, frustration, and panic. Troops who had relied on visual observation to coordinate their fire were now forced to guess the enemy's position. Soldiers in fortified bunkers hesitated, waiting for an attack they could neither see nor anticipate. Entire units became paralyzed, unable to respond effectively. A particularly striking example occurred near the town of San Fabian, where Japanese infantry attempted a counterattack along a ridgeline. Under normal conditions, they might have inflicted severe casualties on exposed American units. However, as smoke enveloped the ridge, their advance became disorganized. Soldiers misfired, collided with each other in confusion, and abandoned positions prematurely. By the time the Americans emerged from the haze, Japanese forces had been fragmented, their morale shattered, and their defensive line broken. The combination of smoke, human ingenuity, and coordinated assault had converted fear into a force multiplier for the Americans. What might have been a bloody stalemate instead became a decisive advance, demonstrating that psychological disruption could rival conventional firepower in determining outcomes. The climax of the Luzon campaign was not limited to a single landing. As smoke proved effective on the beaches, commanders integrated its use into broader operational plans across multiple divisions. The 32nd Infantry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and Marine regiments all coordinated assaults under layered smoke screens, advancing simultaneously on multiple fronts. Smoke became a critical tool for synchronizing attacks across rugged terrain. Valleys, riverbeds, and jungle paths were obscured, allowing infantry and armor to move undetected into positions that had previously been considered kill zones. Artillery observers and forward spotters used prearranged coordinates to target Japanese positions with precision, while the enemy, deprived of visual confirmation, remained uncertain of the assault's strength and direction. One key engagement involved the capture of the Rosario Ridge, a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold. Smoke screens allowed American engineers to clear mines and barbed wire, while flamethrower teams neutralized bunkers without drawing fire. Tanks supported infantry from within the haze, suppressing enemy positions and preventing counterattacks. By the time the smoke began to lift, Rosario Ridge had been captured with minimal American casualties, while Japanese defenders were scattered and disorganized. Such operations highlighted the importance of leadership under extreme conditions. Officers at all levels had to make split-second decisions without visual confirmation of the battlefield. Hand signals, flares, and prearranged timings replaced conventional orders, demanding both trust and discipline. Generals and company commanders monitored the advance through maps, radio reports, and aerial reconnaissance, constantly adjusting the timing and placement of smoke to maintain its protective and disruptive effects. The synchronization of units across divisions exemplified the interplay between leadership and innovation. Without effective command, smoke could have become a liability, obscuring friendly forces and creating confusion among American troops. Instead, disciplined coordination allowed the mist itself to become a tool of precision, ensuring that advances remained methodical and devastatingly effective against an unprepared enemy. By the end of January 17th, the combination of smoke deployment, coordinated assaults, and psychological disruption had achieved a decisive turning point in the Luzon campaign. Japanese defensive lines, previously thought impregnable, had been shattered. Key terrain features, beaches, river crossings, ridges, were now under American control. Casualty ratios favored the Americans more than any prior island campaign, highlighting the effectiveness of using smoke not only as cover, but as an offensive instrument. The battlefield itself had been transformed. What was once a static, deadly landscape dominated by entrenched defenders became fluid, dynamic, and controllable. Smoke allowed Americans to dictate the tempo of battle, to strike where and when they chose, and to maintain the initiative against an enemy that could no longer rely on sight, coordination, or instinct. The events of that day underscored a revolutionary concept in warfare. Controlling perception could be as decisive as controlling territory. In the Pacific, where terrain favored defenders, this principle became a force multiplier, enabling smaller, coordinated units to achieve objectives that would otherwise require overwhelming numbers or firepower. The stage was now set for the final phase of the Luzon campaign, where American forces would exploit the collapse of Japanese defenses to secure the island and press toward Manila. The assault on Lingayen Gulf and the subsequent inland operations marked a turning point not only in the Luzon campaign, but in the broader Pacific theater. By the evening of January 17, 1945, American forces had secured a beachhead that had once seemed nearly impregnable. The combination of smoke, coordinated assaults, and tactical innovation had allowed units to advance several kilometers inland with fewer casualties than anticipated. For the Japanese, the psychological and physical toll was immediate and severe, leaving defensive lines fractured and morale critically weakened. Reports from the 6th Army highlighted the magnitude of the operation. American units recorded approximately 1,500 casualties in the initial landing and inland push, a figure significantly lower than projections based on prior assaults on fortified positions such as Polilliu or Saipan. Japanese casualties, by contrast, were estimated at 3,000 to 4,000 in the same period, with entire platoons neutralized by the combination of disorientation, suppressed fire, and flanking maneuvers enabled by smoke. Soldiers and officers alike noted that smoke was more than a shield. It was a force multiplier that shaped both the physical and psychological battlefield. Beyond raw numbers, the aftermath revealed a shift in tactical doctrine. After-action reports emphasized that the successful integration of smoke with artillery, naval fire, and infantry maneuvers had redefined what was possible in amphibious and inland assaults. Commanders praised its effectiveness in masking troop movements, concealing tanks and engineers, and inducing hesitation in enemy units. One officer noted that the Japanese, who had prided themselves on discipline and precision, often froze entirely under the haze, rendering entrenched positions vulnerable without the need for prolonged frontal assaults. The human cost extended beyond battlefield casualties. Japanese soldiers who survived reported intense psychological strain, with many experiencing confusion and panic during smoke-covered advances. The unpredictability of the battlefield eroded the cohesion of units trained to operate in a rigid, hierarchical manner. Entire defensive positions were abandoned, not because they were overwhelmed by firepower, but because soldiers lost their bearings and could not determine where the enemy was. For the Americans, the confidence gained from moving under smoke reinforced morale and trust in combined arms tactics. The physical landscape of Luzon itself bore the marks of the campaign. Beaches, ridges, and river crossings were littered with debris from both Japanese defenses and the tools used to overcome them. Pillboxes that had once dominated ridgelines were neutralized by flamethrowers and explosives, often following advances under thick smoke. Entire villages that had served as Japanese staging points were captured intact, their defenders dispersed or eliminated, allowing American engineers and infantry to secure them without prolonged house-to-house combat. The battlefield, though chaotic, had been decisively reshaped in favor of the attackers. The strategic consequences were equally profound. The collapse of Japanese defenses along Lingayen Gulf opened a direct path toward Manila, the Philippine capital, enabling the Americans to press their advantage in subsequent operations. Commanders across the 6th Army and Marine Divisions recognized that smoke-based tactics had reduced the costs of assault while maximizing operational effectiveness. The lessons learned here would influence later operations, including attacks on fortified islands and jungle strongholds throughout the Pacific. In addition, the operation exposed a critical vulnerability in Japanese defensive doctrine. Reliant on visual observation, interlocking fields of fire, and strict coordination, Japanese troops struggled when deprived of clear sight. Smoke neutralized these advantages, forcing soldiers to rely on instinct alone, often with fatal results. The combination of human ingenuity, technological support, and psychological disruption made this form of warfare one of the most effective tools in the American arsenal. By the end of the first phase of the Luzon campaign, it was clear that the Americans had not only secured a beachhead, they had transformed the battlefield itself into a weapon. The interplay of smoke, coordinated advances, and psychological disruption had demonstrated a new dimension of combat. Victory could be achieved not merely by overwhelming force, but by controlling perception, timing, and terrain. The operational success of January 17th set the stage for subsequent engagements deeper inland. Japanese forces, though numerous and entrenched, were now reacting to an enemy that had learned to manipulate every aspect of the environment. The effectiveness of smoke and coordinated tactics meant that each further advance would compound the enemy's confusion and attrition, hastening the collapse of defensive networks that had been considered formidable. This moment also left an enduring lesson for commanders and soldiers alike. The battlefield is not just terrain. It is perception, timing, and the ability to strike where the enemy least expects it. The fog of war had been weaponized, and the Americans had used it to devastating effect. The Japanese defensive system, once lauded for its resilience and careful planning, began to unravel under the combined effects of smoke, mobility, and coordinated assaults. Entire divisions found their carefully prepared positions bypassed or neutralized without the anticipated heavy casualties. Reports from Japanese commanders indicated confusion at all levels. Communication lines were disrupted, units retreated prematurely, and counterattacks became fragmented and ineffective. For example, along the Rosario Ridge and Lingayen River, Japanese units that had planned to hold a continuous front line were scattered within hours. Trenches were abandoned, pillboxes surrendered under pressure, and artillery crews often found themselves firing at phantoms in the mist. One officer reported that soldiers hesitated to leave cover, yet remained exposed to unseen fire, reflecting the profound psychological impact of smoke-induced disorientation. The combination of environmental manipulation and relentless American pressure shattered cohesion, leaving remaining Japanese forces to fight in isolated pockets rather than organized defensive lines. The capture of the Lingayen Gulf beachhead and surrounding high ground opened the direct route to Manila, which had previously been heavily defended. American forces were now able to advance with speed and flexibility, seizing key transportation hubs, river crossings, and road networks that facilitated further operations. The use of smoke screens had demonstrated that well-coordinated, perception-focused tactics could reduce casualties while maintaining offensive momentum, a principle that would guide subsequent operations across Luzon and in future island campaigns. The effectiveness of smoke also allowed commanders to implement multi-pronged attacks that overwhelmed Japanese defensive calculations. With visibility restricted, the Japanese could not anticipate which sector would face the main assault, enabling American units to exploit weak points and flank positions. In effect, the battlefield itself became a weapon as commanders manipulated sight lines, terrain, and timing to maintain initiative. The operational use of smoke had a measurable effect on casualty rates. According to official after-action reports, American casualties in the initial landing and inland advance numbered approximately 1,500, remarkably low for a frontal assault against fortified positions. Japanese casualties were estimated at 3,000 to 4,000, with many losses resulting not from direct fire, but from panic, disorganized retreat, and exposure during failed counterattacks. The disparity underscores how smoke served as a force multiplier. It not only provided cover, but also induced paralysis among defenders, reducing the effectiveness of even heavily armed positions. Infantry units, engineers, and armored divisions all benefited from the strategic concealment, allowing operations to proceed with precision and fewer losses than predicted. Beyond the physical toll, the campaign had profound psychological implications. For Japanese soldiers, the inability to see the enemy shattered confidence in traditional doctrine. Units trained for disciplined defensive warfare were forced to react blindly, leading to panic, hesitation, and in some cases, outright surrender. Smoke disrupted not only battlefield operations, but also morale, eroding the mental fortitude that had previously made Japanese defensive lines so formidable. For American forces, the success reinforced trust in innovation, coordination, and technological integration. Soldiers gained confidence in moving under smoke. Artillery crews trusted observers who directed fire through obscure terrain, and commanders grew comfortable executing complex operations with limited visual input. The psychological advantage extended beyond the battlefield, shaping unit cohesion and operational planning for subsequent engagements. The events at Lingayen Gulf and inland positions marked a broader shift in how the Americans approached the Pacific campaign. Smoke screens, once considered a supplementary tactic, had proven their decisive value as a central operational tool. Lessons learned here informed later operations in dense jungle and urban environments, including assaults on fortified positions throughout the Philippines, Okinawa, and beyond. Japanese commanders, forced to adapt to new forms of American tactics, recognized that visual dominance could no longer guarantee battlefield control. The strategic lesson was clear. Control of perception was as important as control of firepower. The Americans had shown that well-coordinated innovation could overcome entrenched defenses and alter the outcome of major operations. Physically, the battlefield bore the marks of this transformation. Beaches were littered with debris from obstacles, mines, and neutralized defensive structures. River crossings and ridgelines, once dominated by Japanese machine guns, were now held by American troops. Villages that had served as enemy strongpoints were liberated with minimal destruction, highlighting how smoke allowed precision in assaults that previously relied on brute force. The combination of human courage, technological application, tactical coordination, and psychological disruption had reshaped both the terrain and the strategic landscape. The Americans had achieved a decisive advantage that went beyond the immediate battle, establishing principles that would guide operation for the remainder of the Luzon campaign and in the broader Pacific theater. The battle for Luzon, and the shock induced in Japanese troops by the Americans' use of smoke, offers a profound lesson in the nature of warfare. Here, victory was not won solely through overwhelming firepower or numerical superiority. Instead, It was achieved through the deliberate manipulation of perception, the careful orchestration of technology, and the disciplined coordination of human will. Smoke became more than a tactical tool. It became a force multiplier, transforming the battlefield itself into an instrument of strategy. For the soldiers on the ground, it demonstrated the fragility and resilience of human perception. American infantrymen moved with courage under a veil of uncertainty, trusting in training, leadership, and one another. Japanese defenders, trained to rely on sight and precision, faced a new reality. The familiar rules of engagement no longer applied. The chaos induced by smoke revealed that the psychological dimensions of warfare, fear, confusion, hesitation, could shape outcomes as decisively as bullets or artillery. Technologically, the campaign highlighted the power of innovation integrated with strategy. Smoke generators, artillery-delivered obscurants, and naval screens were not isolated tools. They were components of a larger system designed to maximize advantage while minimizing risk. This careful orchestration allowed American forces to move fluidly across terrain that might otherwise have been lethal, emphasizing that warfare is as much about controlling perception and timing as it is about firepower alone. Strategically, the lessons of Luzon resonated beyond a single beachhead or ridge line. They informed subsequent Pacific operations, demonstrating that adaptability, ingenuity, and the ability to exploit environmental and technological factors could reshape the calculus of battle. The American success under smoke was a testament to the value of planning, innovation, and disciplined execution, a model that would influence both the remainder of the Philippines campaign and later engagements in the Pacific. Ultimately, the story of Smoke on Luzon is a reminder that warfare is never just about strength. It is about vision, perception, and the capacity to act decisively when the enemy cannot. It underscores that even in the chaos of battle, control can be achieved not only through firepower, but through understanding the human mind, leveraging technology, and mastering the environment. In the end, the haze that once blinded Japanese defenders became a symbol of calculated ingenuity, courage, and the enduring principle that in war, as in life, the unseen can be as decisive as the seen.